Good morning, folks. We took a couple weeks break from Daniel, but here we will get back to it. And since it has been a couple of weeks, let me summarize a little bit what we've been talking about. As we go through the entire book of Daniel, starting on chapter 10, we have his last vision, prophecy of sorts, and that continues all the way to chapter 12, which is the last chapter of the book. So from 10 to 12, it's just basically one story, as opposed to what we've been doing previously, where essentially every chapter is a different story, either a vision or something that happened with Daniel and his friends. And here, Daniel received some type of information through a divine appointment of sorts, and was aided by an angel to sort of interpret that vision, that dream, that information that he received from God. And the angel is aiding him in figuring things out, not only the things that he already foresaw and making more clear, but also adding to the information that he has already been endowed with. In the beginning of chapter 11, we went through a graph of sorts. So let me just look at this map first. As we saw, chapter 11 was all about history unfolding before our eyes. So basically, 300 plus years of history where Daniel was being endowed with information about things that were yet to come from his perspective, but from our perspective, these things have already occurred. At the very least, you can kind of mix and match and put things together, and I don't mean to say, and you guys know that very well, hardly ever do I say 100% beyond a shadow of a doubt. Right? Some things you do say that with, but definitely not this. However, you can kind of reverse engineer what we have in this chapter with what has already occurred in history, and it does match up pretty well. And again, as you go through chapter 11, you will see that there are these battles between this kingdom of the north and the kingdom of the south, and these are the regions that we were talking about. And every single time one region sort of gains a little bit more momentum and power, they sort of take over Jerusalem, which seems to be the buffer zone, the trophy of sorts. And it goes back and forth throughout centuries. But now, next slide, we get to a point where there is a focal point. Again, these kings and these emperors of sorts, they fought for, again, the land and the power. This was after the empire that Alexander the Great built was divided up between four of his generals. The northern kingdom and the southern kingdom are two of these generals, and these are the two most prominent locations. The other two are unaccounted for because they really don't matter regarding the history that is being depicted here. But again, two of the generals basically ruled over that portion of the world, the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. Don't confuse that with the northern and the southern kingdom of Israel. That's a totally different thing. And they basically built monarchies, families of sorts. So then their ancestors tried to continue this tug of war, again, to gain more territory, to gain more power, much like any emperor would do, right? That's kind of the thing that emperors do. And you see the verses to the left of this graph, and we went through the verses previously in chapter 11 to try to figure out who was doing what to whom. And we did a relatively decent job with that. And now finally we get to the last one, where you have verses 21 to 45. So there's a focal point, likely, probably, of this particular character who was very much a real historical figure. His name is Antiochus the Fourth. Antiochus the Fourth, again, this emperor from this northern kingdom. And by the way, coincidence or not, everyone has been watching the news lately. So go ahead and go to the previous slide, if you could. And what do you see there in the northern kingdom? What area is that of the world? Does that look familiar at all with what's going on? So again, these things have been happening for a very long time, and they will continue to happen. Portion of that is literally given to us through prophecy. Other things we just kind of witness as they happen. And it is interesting that certain things have been happening that very much attaches to the phenomenon that is being depicted here historically. So go ahead and move forward. And again, we are now going to focus on Antiochus the Fourth. There are historical accounts of this particular emperor. Again, if you go to a museum, you'll even see, statues of his bust, his face, right? And accounts of what he did. He was not very nice to the Jews, which is why there's sort of a parallel between what he did to the Jews and what potentially the Antichrist will do to God's people in the future. So that's more or less the focus of what we will see here, how this guy sort of did his thing and how what he did parallels with what is yet to come. That's more or less the general idea of this portion of Scripture, at the very least, how I am, working with it. I'm sure there are many other ways that we could figure out how to do a study like this, but again, we are limited by the actual content. So today we will go over verses 21 to 39 of Daniel chapter 11. And just like I did a few weeks ago, where every once in a while I'd stop and I'd allude to something that happened in history, we will continue to do that as well. I'm not going to read it all the way through because it's a lot of verses, so I'll just read it one portion at a time and then talk a little bit about it and then continue until we get to the end here, not of the chapter, but of the portion that we have allotted for us today. You guys ready to go? Yes? All right, get hyped. So let's go ahead and start from verse 21. We left off at verse 20 a couple weeks ago, so now let's read verse 21. And it says here, "And in his place shall arise a vile person, to whom they will not give the honor of royalty, but he shall come peaceably and seize the kingdom by intrigue." So again, this is possibly a reference to this Antiochus the Fourth. Originally, his older brother, was the one that took over the kingdom when their father died, which usually, that's what happened. The older son usually took over, and this older son, his older brother, died, was murdered accidentally. Oops, he is dead. And then, history tells us that this guy was, somewhat of a politician, a sweet talker of sorts. There are other people that could have taken over the kingdom, but because of his tenacity and again, because of how he was able to maneuver through the authorities that were around the decision makers, he was able to attain this power and move forward with his, plans to conquer the world like Pinky and the Brain. So here again, very likely we have him now being the focal point of this particular chapter because of the stuff that he started doing initially by potentially murdering his own older brother. Now let's read from verse 22 to verse 27. So a larger chunk, but this is more or less having to do with his failed pursuit to take over and conquer the kingdom of the south. Again, in the beginning of the chapter, we saw this back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And this is going to somewhat continue. Now, he is the one in charge of the northern kingdom, and he is continuing to try to conquer the kingdom to the south, more or less in the area of Egypt. So on verse 22, it says here, with the force of a flood, they shall be swept away from before him and be broken, and also the prince of the covenant. And after the league is made with him, he shall act deceitfully, for he shall come up and become strong with a small number of people. He shall enter peaceably, even into the richest places of the province, and he shall do what his fathers have not done, nor his forefathers. He shall disperse among them the plundered spoil and riches, and he shall devise his plans against the strongholds, but only for a time. He shall stir up his power and his courage against the king of the south with a great army, and the king of the south shall be stirred up to battle with a very great and mighty army. But he shall not stand, for they shall devise plans against him. Yes, those who eat of the portion of his delicacies shall destroy him. His army shall be swept away, and many shall fall down slain. Both these kings' hearts shall be bent on evil, and they shall speak lies at the same table, but it shall not prosper, for the end will still be at the appointed time. So on verse 22, there's a mention of a force of flood. This is likely symbolic, poetic language pertaining to the almost overwhelming forces that he would try to use to take over that region in Egypt, the kingdom of the south. And then there's a mention pertaining to a prince of the covenant. Now that's vague, to say the least. It is likely, possibly, something having to do with the fact that at that particular time, he went ahead and made some changes pertaining to who was in charge of the religious duties of the Jews, namely the high priest. So basically he exchanged the current high priest, who was not too fond of him, with someone else that he could better control and was more to his liking. Verse 23 mentions something about a league. Now, this is not a team sport league. It's actually somewhat of an accord. And within context, it basically states there that he was a deceiver. So not only was he a potential murderer, sweet talker, but also he was a deceiver. Basically, he would try to make these treaties and these accords, not only with the kingdom of the south, but, with other, important people of the region, both within his empire and outside of his empire. But eventually, soon enough, he would break all of those agreements because he was very cunning and he was planning all of these things in a very deceitful way. On 24, it mentions a little bit of his tactics. So as he went into the region of the southern kingdom, again, with this idea that he was making a treaty with this other emperor, he went to it in a very peaceful way. So he was just there doing some touring, pretending to be, friends and ally with the other king and looking around all the fortresses and stuff, but doing that very much knowing that he would eventually attack the southern kingdom or that region of Egypt as well. Well, unfortunately, based on history and based on the accounts that we have here put on display for us, it didn't really work because the southern kingdom was just as crafty, the king and the ruler of that kingdom. So basically, they were just deceiving each other back and forth, pretending to be friendly, but knowing fully well that it was just a matter of time before one or the other rival king would do something to break whatever peace agreement that they were trying to, manage at that particular time. There's also a portion on verse 26 that talks about something happening with those who eat of the portion of his delicacies. Basically, as you would expect, there was a lot of backstabbing going on. So even some of his own counselors, even some of his own allies pretended to like him, but eventually again went against him in favor of the other king or in favor of someone else who was deemed a little bit more powerful. So as mentioned a couple weeks ago, very much Game of Thrones-y. Right? Very much things that happen throughout history, typical stuff of kings that want to expand their territory and want to conquer the world. Now from verse 28 to verse 35, because he wasn't very successful, now there is a shift. So it's not as much him trying to conquer the southern kingdom as him trying to take out his anger on God's people, namely the Jews. So let's read from verse 28 on. And it says here, while returning to his land with great riches, his heart shall be moved against the holy covenant, and he shall do damage and return to his own land. So, as stated, he went to the southern kingdom, disguised as a friend, eventually started to battle against them, was not very victorious. Now he is going back to his homeland, the northern kingdom. Based on the map that we saw, where does he have to go by to reach his own land? Israel. He has to literally cross it. So historically, and within this particular context, it basically happened that he was so distraught, so furious that he wanted to take it out on someone, and he eventually did so with the Jews. And again, this is potentially what is being referenced here with regards to moving against the Holy Covenant. In other words, moving against the covenant people. Verse 29. At the appointed time, he shall return and go towards the south, but it shall not be like the former or the latter. For ships from Cyprus shall come against him, therefore he shall be grieved and return in rage against the holy covenant and do damage. This reference to the ships from Cyprus that were sort of attacking and against him, it is likely the Roman Empire, and they were catching steam. The southern kingdom was aided by the Roman Empire, and they were sort of tag teaming against this northern kingdom and king, and they were defeated, he was defeated, and again, very much distraught, upset, and wanted to take out his fury against someone. And again on verse 30, so he shall return and show regard for those who forsake the holy covenant, and forces shall be mustered by him, and they shall defile the sanctuary fortress. Then they shall take away the daily sacrifices and place there the abomination of desolation. So there are several historical accounts including some that some of you might be familiar with. There's this Maccabean revolt that is entitled like that because Maccabee was a leader of this revolt from the Jews against this particular person. So basically, as he was going back home, he stopped by the Jews. He didn't like them very much, and he started to harass them to the point where he entered into the temple courts. He took away all of the vessels, and he replaced them with things that were ungodly. He sacrificed a pig in the altar of God and erected a statue, an idol of Zeus, just because he wanted to make sure that the Jews, were in line with his Hellenistic perspectives and worldviews. He basically wanted to change things up. And a portion of the Jews went ahead and became Hellenistic. With regards to this Greek philosophy and culture. They became a little bit more Greek. The other portion were the ones that revolted against the system and eventually kicked them out. But here we have this depiction of him going in and doing all of these atrocities, and now people have to choose which side they are in. Are they going to confirm what he is trying to do? In other words, make them more Greek? Or are they going to maintain their own culture, their own religion, and their own devotion to God, however, suffer the consequences because of that? It is stated and listed in historical accounts that he killed over 80,000 Jews. He took other 40,000 prisoners and also another 40+ thousand as slaves. And again, that's aside from doing all those atrocities within the confinements of the temple itself. Moving on. Verse 32, those who do wickedly against the covenant, he shall corrupt and with flattery. But the people who know their God shall be strong and carry out great exploits. And those of the people who understand shall instruct many, yet for many days they shall fall by the sword and flame, by captivity and plundering. Now when they fall, they shall be aided with a little help, but many shall join with them by intrigue. And some of those understanding shall fall, to refine them, purifying them, and make them white until the time of the end, because it is still for the appointed time. Again, as I alluded to, now there is this fraction and division of sorts amongst the Jews. Some who are for all of these things that are happening, frankly, because they are scared of this great emperor who's trying to change things up, and they're just giving up and adopting everything that he is trying to change. Others are very much against it and are willing to die and are willing to suffer and are willing to revolt against said person. But again, they will pay a severe price. Now we have something that happened in history. We have accounts of this happening, quite literally. And again, based on the description of this prophecy, it kind of matches. It really does kind of match. It is not the only possible interpretation, but it is one that is likely. And as we've seen in Scripture, oftentimes, and I've alluded to this ad nauseum, there is a type and there is an anti-type, where a person or a type of person is introduced in Scripture, and we know things about that person. That person does a bunch of things, whether good or bad, and then they are utilized as an illustration for something that is yet to come. And here, the text depicts this particular emperor and the atrocities that were caused by his thirst for power against the Jews, he is a type of Antichrist, where certain things will still occur in our future that somehow resemble what he did in our past, even though our past was still Daniel's future. You got that? You're keeping track of the timeline here? We're going back and forth, sort of like a movie that has a bunch of flashbacks. So continuing, verse 36 to 39. So this is the last little section here, and this section focuses a lot more to this future antitype, where the actual Antichrist will be doing horrible things that are similar to the ones that Antiochus did to the Jews at that particular time in history during the Maccabean revolt of sorts. So it says on verse 36, "Then the king shall do according to his own will. He shall exalt and magnify himself above every god, shall speak blasphemy against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the wrath has been accomplished. For what has been determined shall be done. He shall regard neither God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any God, for he shall exalt himself above them all." So again, it's describing potentially the Antichrist that is yet to come, and the fact that he is going to place himself in the position of God and not really regard any other God other than himself or his own gods. There's a reference here of not regarding women as well. The translation is kind of iffy depending on your particular version of the Bible. The verbiage there is adjusted a little bit. It may be that he didn't like women. Likely, it is a continuation of the thought. What was the thought there? That he didn't regard any gods, including the gods that women regarded. It is a possible translation or interpretation of this text. It's not really that important, but again, the focus is the fact that he is placing himself in the position of God. And it goes on, "But in their place he shall honor a god of fortress, and a god which his fathers did not know he shall honor with gold and silver, with precious stones and pleasant things." This God of fortress, basically, the God that he honors is the God of military might, power, just trying to conquer the world, seduce as many people as he can, just based on the prowess that he possesses, or at the very least thinks he possesses. And finally, verse 39, "Thus he shall act against the strongest fortresses with a foreign god, which he shall acknowledge and advance its glory, and he shall cause them to rule over many and divide the nation for gain." Again, atrocities on top of atrocities on top of atrocities. Now let's digest this holistically a little bit. We've gone through the verses. We tried to, our best, my best, to match it with history that has already occurred, but also being sensitive to certain things that have not happened and likely will come to be in the future. It is interesting that there is a very particular terminology here that Daniel is using. Technically, the angel was speaking, and Daniel, at one point or another, he documented the angel's words. But on verse 31 says, "And forces shall be mustered by him, and they shall defile the sanctuary fortress," in other words, the temple. "Then they shall take away the daily sacrifices," which he did, "and place there the abomination of desolation," which pertains to the sacrificing of the pig and the idolatry, and trying to manipulate the religious system that was in place. But again, the term is important: abomination of desolation. It is interesting that Jesus himself referred to this particular phenomenon, but he did so in the future tense. So what we see here depicted happened in history, even though it was in Daniel's future, it is in our past, and it also was in Jesus' past. Take a moment, think about what I just said. What happened here, this desolation, this abomination of desolation, happened in our past. You got it? And it also happened in Jesus' past while he was roaming the earth. You got that? Good. Now, interestingly enough, in Matthew chapter 24, Jesus, who was very knowledgeable of Scripture, alludes to Daniel chapter 11. And in Matthew chapter 24 from verse 15, look at what he tells his people. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him who is on the housetop not go down to take anything out of his house, and let him who is in the field not go back to his clothes. But woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days, and pray that your flight might not be in winter or on the Sabbath. For then there will be a great tribulation, such as has not been seen in the beginning of the world till this time, nor ever shall be. So there's an issue here with time. We know that something happened that through Daniel's words, based on the information that he got from the angel, that was called abomination or abomination of desolation, which is what happened in the temple and with the Jewish people. Jesus is borrowing from that, but he is saying that it's something that is actually yet to come. And there's nothing really in history that we can pinpoint and say from Jesus' time till our time, in other words, these past 2,000 or so years, that resemble much of what is being depicted here. Obviously, atrocities have happened with the Jews, but if you continue to read through chapter 24 of Matthew, we stopped at a point because we don't have enough time, but it doesn't really match anything that has occurred. So again, it kind of leads us to believe that it is a strong possibility, not 100%, but a strong possibility that it's something that is yet to come. Another thing that I want to point out, now going back to Daniel chapter 11, multiple times as this history is being described, a mention of sorts is made pertaining to who is in control. And it's kind of subtle, and you can read through it and you won't catch it, which is why I want to read it again. So for example, on verse 27 of Daniel chapter 11, both these kings' hearts shall be bent on evil, and they shall speak lies at the same table, but it shall not prosper, for the end will still be at the appointed time. Verse 31, and forces shall be mustered by him, and they shall defile the sanctuary fortress. Then they shall take away the daily sacrifices and place there the abomination of desolation. I'm sorry, I meant verse 35. But 31 is a great verse as well. And some of those understanding shall fall to refine them, purify them, and make them white until the time of the end, because it is still for the appointed time. What is this appointed time? And who is appointing this time? The appointed time is the time that God has established, and he is the one that is appointing it. What we have here is a description of God's sovereignty. Regardless of how you make sense of this, whether you agree with me or people who are smarter than me that have a different perspective, fact of the matter is, history is unfolding before our eyes. Whether these are things that happened in the past, or things that will happen in the future, or things that will happen in the future and mimic things that happened in the past, one way or another, history is unfolding before our eyes. And you can think of history and story and the human condition as things that just happen haphazardly, by chance, sometimes by mistake, or you can think of it as something that is being meticulously managed to the point where they can be described beforehand centuries prior. And not only that, this agent of history creation can also manipulate the people that are part of history, so that one thing happens that will mimic something that will happen in the future. I choose to believe in that type of history. Do you know why? It's because we serve a God that has more knowledge, more power, and a better grasp of our and the future than we have of our own past. Do we have knowledge of the past? Your own particular, I'm not talking about prehistoric history, just your own particular past. You know where you came from. Some of these stories you were told, you don't really remember firsthand, but people tell you stories often enough, it kind of sinks into the point where you were actually experiencing. But many of you have memories of your childhood. If you're old enough, of your preteen and teen years, early adulthood, mid-adulthood, late adulthood, and I'll stop right there. Because you've caught up. It's real time now. You have a grasp of your past. You have understanding of your past, partially because you lived it, you experienced it, you were told stories, and you put the puzzle pieces together and you can make sense of your past. Guess what? God has a better grasp of things that have not yet occurred, exponentially better than you have of your own puny little yet significant past. That's the God that we serve. We should be in utter awe and amazement. Whenever we fail to consider how awesome God is, that's when we get all worked up. About what? About the present and the future. That God knows exponentially more and has more power than we can ever imagine. The God that we serve is the God that has power over all, past, present, and future. Amen.